Hello and welcome to another video. And today, before I get really like neck deep into Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which I've already started, I'm very early in the game. I've played like maybe 5-6 hours, but before I get really deep into that, I wanted to make a video about everything that's going on in the games industry right now, between layoffs, between unnecessary hardware refreshes that I'm gonna touch on that as well, and just kind of my opinion of everything that's going on right now, because it's looking really dire for the games industry at the top end. You know, I think the middle tier and the indie games are going to be just fine, but when you look at the top tier AAA gaming space, it's a shit show right now. And so I want to get into that today, because I've kind of stayed muted on it, except for on the podcast. We've touched on it like every week. There's always a news article. It's like, all right, this company let this percentage of their employees go, and this percentage. But it's really this last week, I think it's churned a major corner, and now it's just really getting out of fucking hand. So first things first, and originally my plan for the video was to talk about how I don't think the PS5 Pro is going to be worth it. I don't think it should exist. I think Sony is crazy at this point to put out a more powerful PlayStation 5, especially given everything that's going on right now. I think it's even dumber to do it. I still feel like we haven't scratched the surface of what these machines are capable of. And the biggest problem I have with it is we're still making games for PlayStation 4, for Xbox One. Although I have noticed in like the last year, Xbox One versions kind of don't happen. It's just PS4. And I think it is because the original Xbox One was the weaker of those two systems, and now they're just like, it's not even worth it. So, but still, we're still making games for PS4, like everything. Like recently announced East 10 Nordics, which I'm super excited about, is still a PlayStation 4 game. And this is a system that's been out over 10 years now. And we haven't really seen this happen any other console generation, with the exception of sports games. You know, like the latest Madden or NBA or whatever is always going to come out on those older platforms until they literally don't think it's feasible anymore or not profitable anymore. And so but this generation, for whatever reason, this generation, we have held on to putting games out on PS4 still. Like last year, Resident Evil 4 Remake still came out on PS4. It's a very bad version. And so I love to celebrate when we get a game that is just made for PS5 or Xbox Series systems, or for both of those, and it cuts those out. Rebirth is a great example of a game that, even though I'm only 5-6 hours in, I can honestly 100% tell you that game would never work on a PS4. So I understand why they did what they did. But again, and that proves my point, is a PlayStation 5 Pro doesn't make sense for why they want to put that out this fall. The rumors now are that it will cost more than the PS5 currently does, because they're not going to lower the price of the PlayStation 5. It's still going to sit at $500. So then you ask yourself, okay, how much is it going to cost? $600? $700? Like, we don't know. That leads me to transition into the next part of this, which is the massive slew of layoffs in the games industry. And we're learning that video games that are big AAA budget, much like movies, if you look at the movie industry, they're having the same problem right now. We're spending way too much money making these games that are just, so much money is being put in that not enough money is coming out of it. When they put this AAA game up, it's not selling the way that they expect it to. And that's why you see time and time again, AAA games are on sale 2 weeks later. Like, the most recent failure I can give you an example of is the Suicide Squad game, which I've predicted forever that game was going to be a failure, but it failed massively, to the point that it's already $30 cheaper. Like we've seen it at $40 to $50 sale prices already 1 month later. literally from the day of recording this 1 month later. The game just, it was a bad idea from the beginning. And obviously I'm not going to get into all the problems with Suicide Squad. I did not play the game. I really probably will never play the game at this point. If I do, it's a, $10 Black Friday purchase that I just want to get through the story with a buddy or something. But I have no plans to like go out and buy the Suicide Squad, because it just, holy shit, that game looks bad. But again, that's Rocksteady, right? Rocksteady, the makers of the Arkham series. They spent 9 years making this game. And again, you can throw in that the pandemic threw kind of a wrench into the machine there. But even without it, let's say the pandemic didn't happen and the game came out in 2022 for these systems, it still would have failed, because it's not what people are looking for. They were going off of an idea of where the industry was going almost a decade ago. And that's the other problem. We're still working and putting out games that came out, a decade ago. These ideas were made, right? Like, what was the big popular idea a decade ago? Destiny, right? Destiny was going to change everything about video games, about live service. It kind of penned live service, and everybody wanted to catch that thunder, so to speak. So that's why you see this boom of live service games. What's happened is, in the last decade, gamers have kind of been like, man, I'm not really interested in live service anymore. And they've kind of pushed away from live service. And when that happens, it's, people don't care. People are done with that type of game. It's refreshing when you see something like that most recent Prince of Persia game, which I really want to play, but I'll wait for a sale on it. It's refreshing to see a game like that come out, and I think it's something that should be championed, but I don't think that game is going to move the needle either. And we're now seeing Skull and Bones, which Ubisoft is trying to come out and say like, oh, hey man, that like this game is record player numbers, but it's a new IP, it's a new franchise. So what are those record numbers going up against? Like, is it, 5 people playing the game, record numbers for a new franchise? Yeah. So, but they won't put out sales numbers because, let's be fair, like, the sales numbers for that game are probably piss poor because it's another live service game, and live service games just, they're not the future. Throwing all these microtransactions in are not the future. And the other problem with it, why you're seeing all these layoffs and stuff, is unfortunately, these are all decisions that were made by shareholders and CEOs and people that are at the top of the fucking food chain. The people that are suffering over this are the people that are at the bottom because they're expendable. Because any big, huge company, they're always going to protect the shareholders. That's going to happen every single time. I'm not saying it's right. I don't agree with it, but that's what happens. That's the reality of the situation. So anybody under that level is going to be expendable. So, and again, as I've said, you've seen the same thing happen all last year in the movie industry, right? Like, people are tired of big, huge budget blockbuster movies. Big, huge budget blockbuster movies that are forcing, messages and stuff in them that not everybody agrees with, and people are tired of it. They're tired of seeing their favorite superhero sidelined for less great superheroes that maybe people don't care about. And then you have, Disney, who's just shitting out remakes left and right that people don't like. People, generally speaking, from my understanding, people did not like The Little Mermaid. People did not like, people super don't like that Snow White movie that I really hope gets canceled because it just looks like fucking garbage. But people really don't like these remakes. They had last year, they had this Wish movie that came out that was supposed to celebrate 100 years of Disney animation, and it's like one of the fucking worst movies that they've ever produced, like animation wise, to the point that the animation is bad. And I've said before, like, what's a good test to see if an animated movie has kicked it off with kids? Go into your local Walmart, Target, whatever that sells kids toys. Look at the toy section and look at what's selling. Okay, when that movie came out, I happened to be in Walmart, and I always go through the toy section because, hey, guess what? I buy Batman toys all the time. You can see behind me on my shelves now that are, fixed up, that I got stuff on the shelves. But that Wish movie, going by their section, not a single toy had moved. And I'm talking like seeing it like maybe a couple days after that movie came out, and then 2 weeks later, it looked like nothing had been touched. And that tells me that that's a great sign of like kids aren't clicking with this shit. So, but we've seen just failure and failure and failure out of specifically Disney. I like to pick on the most in that situation, but there are others, that have been failures last year as well. But every one of these big movies that, theoretically should have done big money numbers did not. And all kind of culminating in The Marvels, which was a fucking disaster. And then most recently Madam Web, which again, Madam Web is not a Marvel MCU movie. It's a Sony movie. So we already knew that it wasn't going to do well, but I mean, it did as poorly as we thought it would do. It did worse. So yeah, and then people are just tired of it, but there is usually there's some hope out there. At least for the movie industry, the hope in this situation, like Dune just came out. I just did a review, which you can watch the short of on the channel. And like, that's a huge, big budget blockbuster science fiction movie. But I'll say this about it as someone who read the book, probably almost 20 years ago now. It's incredibly faithful to the book. They do make some minor changes and tweaks and stuff that I think are important for the adaptation that they're telling in that movie. But for the most part, they are tried and true. They're not switching, and they're not doing this stuff with like, oh, well, we're going to rewrite this character to be something else, or we're going to do this or that with the story because people might be offended by this or that. They don't do any of that in Dune. They just fucking made Dune. And it's going to show when the box office numbers come out. Like, people are going to that movie. People are fucking excited to see it. And it is a big, huge blockbuster sci-fi epic. It's not perfect. And I'm seeing a lot of like masterpieces, thrown around. Like, people love to use the term masterpiece for this movie. And as someone who sat and watched it, I think it's very good. I enjoyed it. I don't think it's a masterpiece. So, but that tells you how starved people are for good quality content. And that's the point that I'm trying to make on both sides, with it being movies and with it being games. As I kind of go back to talking about games here, is specifically people are tired of the bullshit. I'm tired of it. You're tired of it. People are tired of games just having shoehorned in microtransaction after microtransaction, and stories that just aren't really that great. I can give two examples, and I know I'm gonna get hate in the comments on this, but I'll give two recent examples of big budget video games that did well, but I think the story suffered. Number one, Horizon Forbidden West. I think the story for that game is gotten almost in a nonsensical area by the end of it, to the point that, like, I love the first Horizon. I thought the game was amazing, and the story just tanked to the point that I don't know if I care where the story goes now. I did play the DLC. I had my issues with the DLC as well, but I don't know, man. Like, it just, something about the story wasn't great there. And the other one that I'll throw out, I throw this example out all the time. I'm, ready to defend my opinion on this every single time I mention it. But The Last of Us Part 2 is a fucking shining beacon example of how not to write a story. And I don't get, it's like, it's critical perception, like the critics love the game because of course they did. It's a Sony exclusive. We've talked before on my channel that the media for video games is incredibly biased towards Sony and has been for a decade. But that game in particular, as a massive fan of the original Last of Us, love that game. I think that game was so good that it didn't need a sequel. And I was right. It didn't need a sequel because it's written by someone who very clearly didn't seem like they wanted to make a Last of Us 2, and just made a lot of very stupid writing decisions in that game, to the point that when you get to the end and you get through that ending, you question what was the purpose? What was the goal here? Because they did not fulfill the goal of what that game should have been. And I couldn't even tell you what a Last of Us Part 3 would be or should be, because I don't fucking care. By the end of Last of Us Part 2, I was done. I've played through that game once. I'll never play through it again. I've said that many times on this channel. I just don't care. I thought it was that bad. And even if everything else fires on all cylinders in that game, like the AI specifically, I think is amazing in that game in terms of how enemies react. The graphics were phenomenal. The gameplay was phenomenal. Every other part of that game is a 10 out of 10, right? But the story is like a 2 out of 10. And that's why it's like, no, that game not very good, because I can't recommend it when the core element of it is the story. You want to see where that goes. So I think that problem exists in gaming as well. And I think that's a good part of it. And the other part is people are pushing back against microtransactions and buying games day one because they're now fucking $70. And unless it's a surefire thing like Final Fantasy Rebirth, or even more recently, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, which they celebrated the fastest selling Yakuza game they've ever made with Infinite Wealth. And again, they've earned it because they're telling insanely incredible stories with those games. Rightfully so. I'm like halfway through that game right now, and I'll say the story is amazing. So the writing is just, the way that they write characters, I think, is second to none in video games right now. So, but yeah, like it's just, there's so much bullshit going on. And I think Sony also learned recently with Helldivers 2 that they don't need to have big budget games be their top dog. I mean, Helldivers 2 is, I haven't seen a game take fire like that since the 360 days. It has this like Xbox 360 energy to it where it's like, okay, this game's out. Hey, it's actually really fucking good. Are there microtransactions in it? Yes, but you don't have to do anything with it. It's not tied to any of the trophies. It's not a requirement. You can unlock all that shit just by playing the fucking game, which is how it should be. And it's not so egregious that they slow that down either. But yeah, like it's a shining example of like, wow, they really made a fucking great game around a concept that everybody from my generation likes, which is Starship Troopers. And there's a little Terminator thrown in there as well. And it's an amazing cooperative experience. And one of the biggest surprise of this year thus far. I'll be amazed if there's a bigger surprise this year than Helldivers 2, because it came out of nowhere. You know, I knew of its existence. I said, I think a couple times on the podcast, like, I don't know if people are going to give a shit about this, because Helldivers 1 was almost a decade ago, and they made this a completely different thing than the first one. The first one was kind of this asymmetrical, like, almost strategy, like top-down shooter type thing. This is not that. This is a third-person cooperative shooter. And boy, was I wrong. Like, people just jump to this. I've never seen it. I have literally pretty much every one of my friends, minus one of them, is playing that game. And it's incredible to see a game take that kind of impact. It's a mess. I mean, I wanted to point out something else in this, which I think we should discuss here. All right, so I wanted to throw this article up. There are so many articles that are floating around right now about layoffs between different companies. Sony laid off 900 people. EA has laid off roughly about 700, which is about 5% of its global staff. But the more important thing out of this article, and I think the thing that people should pay attention to out of this, besides the fact that people are being laid off, that sucks, is that they're canceling a lot of AAA games, and even big franchises are being canned. One of the biggest things in here, and I can't remember if it was this article or if it was a different one that I read, but supposedly Battlefield is just a franchise they're shelving. Like, they were hard at work on a new Battlefield that was going to come out in 2025. They're fucking shutting that down. And this is the other part I want to put out of it, another blow to the games industry. I just want to read this part really quick here. This marks yet another major blow to the games industry, coming off of a year and a half of ongoing mass layoffs at studios of all sizes. The cuts impact roughly 10,000 developers in 2023 and are approaching 8,000 in just the first 2 months of 2024. Just earlier this week, PlayStation laid off 900 staff and closed its London studio. Die Gut Fabric shut down and Supermassive laid off 90 people. Supermassive, the people that are currently working on a remake of Until Dawn, which doesn't need to exist. There's a huge note here at the end of this article, and I'm not going to get into it, but I just wanted to share this specific article because there's other things that are talking about. I mean, we're talking about several confirmed Star Wars and Marvel games in development have been canceled. There's a very good chance that we might not see a third Jedi Survivor game, which, I mean, I'll be honest, like, as someone who loved the first Jedi game in 2019, like, really loved that game. I thought it was a really good, true, like, back to form what we should expect out of a first a single player Star Wars game. They dropped the ball with that last one. I mean, it was unplayable on launch, and it took them 7 months to get that game playable on modern consoles. And the game suffered and didn't do well because they forced it out the door to make their like sales. And so I mean, it sucks, but it is what it is. And also, like, I mean, at this point, I mean, look at how Marvel's doing in the movie side. They're doing terribly. Does a Black Panther game make sense when, unfortunately that actor died? And I'll be honest, Black Panther 2, which I have not seen, but is, for all intents and purposes, my understanding, just a movie that celebrates the life of that actor and that character, because they deal with it as he died in that movie. I don't think that movie set the world on fire, and so I don't think a Black Panther game at this point really makes sense because Marvel's hurting. That goes with the Iron Man game as well. Again, I don't think people are coming out to buy these games, which is why when you look at a studio like Insomniac and like, yeah, Spider-Man's doing really well because, again, it's fucking Spider-Man. People, when you look at your main heroes that sell, Batman, Superman, Spider-Man are always at the top, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a new Batman movie. People are going to go because that's interchangeable, like James Bond. People want to see the new person in the suit and how their interpretation of that character is. That's one of the most fun things about live action Batman movies. You can say the same about Superman and Spider-Man as well. Like, I'm super excited for James Gunn's Superman. And, whatever they do in the future with Spider-Man, be it, we get a fourth movie with Tom, I almost said Tom Welling, Tom Holland, or, we go a different direction. Maybe we make a live action Miles Morales. That'd be awesome. I'm super down for that. That's the fun of that. But I think big budget games in the Marvel space don't make sense in our current times. So what's the solution? What's the solution in this industry right now for games? What do we do? Do we go back to making games that don't cost as much? I think that's a good start. I don't think things need to be licensed. I don't think things need to be. I don't think we need to go for the biggest possible thing. I think it would make a lot more sense if they scaled projects back a little bit. And again, making games is expensive. We've known that for a while. But I will say, like triple A gaming, I don't think is going to completely die. It's going to evolve and it's going to change. What that change is, we'll see. It will get the shot in the arm that it needs this time next year when GTA 5, Grand Theft Auto 6 releases, if it even releases next spring. Again, Grand Theft Auto is notorious. That's a franchise notorious for delays. And again, Rockstar knows that they can put that game out whenever they want, whatever time of year. It doesn't matter. It will sell. They know that. I mean, Grand Theft Auto 6, that first trailer last December isn't it like the most watched thing in history now? So like, on YouTube. Like, I believe that trailer is the most watched thing in history now. So yeah, people are excited about a Grand Theft Auto 6, and that game will sell. It doesn't matter. That will sell systems. You are going to see people that don't have a PS5 or Series X buy one just to play Grand Theft Auto 6. So it's unfortunate. I kind of wish that game came out earlier this generation, because I think we would have moved away from, hey, we're still making games for PS4. But it is what it is. So, but as far as the solution to this, I think, again, start slashing some budgets. Don't greenlight so many stupid projects. That's the other thing. Like, we greenlight, just because when you sign these deals, when you thought about these ideas, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, yeah, what were we coming off of in the movie industry? Endgame. Okay, that was a massive deal, right? So Marvel was firing on every cylinder possible, and anything Marvel would have sold. But now that brand is so tanked that people don't care. And I just don't see some of those other games doing as well as, say, another Spider-Man or another if Rocksteady wants to stay in the industry, I think they have to make another Batman game, right? Like, I don't think, if they survive the Suicide Squad, which I don't know if they will, let's be fair. I've predicted on the podcast against what Dan said on the podcast, which is he thinks that they have one more game in them. I think that this tanks that studio. I think it's that big of a deal. I mean, again, they spent 9 years and who knows how much money into this game and into marketing, and it just, people don't fucking give a shit about it. And it shows. And again, as I said before, you had that brief window of when the James Gunn movie came out in 2021. That was the time between that and that Peacemaker show. That was the time to put that game out, because people gave a little bit of a shit about the Suicide Squad in that 6-month window, and it's gone. So when that game finally came out in 2024, people did not give a shit. And also, like, the DC brand is in the toilet. If this new Superman iteration doesn't take off next year, what's going to happen? So, but yeah, I think that's the solution, is to slash budgets on games and don't make things that don't make sense. If your game didn't make the money that you expected it to, maybe don't greenlight that sequel. So, and as far as people, all the game developers out there that have been laid off, like, hopefully they land on their feet. The games industry has also always had massive turnover. And I think that you will see some smaller studios rise up because of this. And we probably will see some very interesting things in the coming years for video games. But I think, again, AAA games, as you know them, as these big budget spectacles, much like movies, I think they're going to be wildly different in 4 to 5 years. So anyways, that's enough rambling for today. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this situation. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And as always, until next time.